Hello my dear friends, and welcome back to another Star Wars video. So today we're going to be talking about one of the biggest criticisms levied towards Andor seasons 1 and 2. It's something which fans have been talking about since the first season, but Tony Gilroy's finally addressed it. Andor lacks aliens. They're sprinkled in here and there, but compared to the rest of the universe, this series is extraordinarily human-centric. And I would say it's a big reason fans who don't like the series say it doesn't feel like Star Wars to them. In this video, I'm going to give you my take looking at both perspectives. On the one hand, why it makes sense in light of the Empire's anti-alien bias, and then I'll give you the other side of the coin of why Andor should have included more non-human sentience. I love Andor and I think it's fantastic, but you have to admit, aliens are never main characters in this show. If they do appear, they're a background character, and with only one or two exceptions, they don't have much dialogue. Season 2 improved this to some extent, but let's see what Tony Gilroy had to say about it. I've come prepared for this. I did my research. He commented on this problem during the first season, and now he's talked about it again. Here's what he originally said. There's some, and we'll probably have more. It's a very strong flavor when it comes in. It's not just a visual flavor. It's a very strong character flavor. You have to deal with it politically. And in some places people were saying, why is Narkina 5 all humans? And to answer this, he gives a pretty hilarious response. He says, I don't know how to work out the bathroom situation on Narkina. With all different aliens, with differing varieties of, let's say anatomy, it would get a bit tricky. But maybe there's an Narkina 2 for that. We'll come on to his comments about the second season in just a moment, because he did change things up. But right off the bat, his philosophy about Star Wars is very contradictory to what George Lucas said. I get what Tony's saying about the very strong flavor of Star Wars that aliens bring. It's very fantasy, whereas Andor is more human-centric and more grounded. But George never wanted you to make the difference between humans and sentient aliens. That was George's idea of diversity. Everyone is an alien. And in his own words, the idea is you're supposed to accept people for what they are. It wasn't intended to be what Tony calls a strong flavor. It was the flavor. It was a fundamental part of what Star Wars is. Because Star Wars is home to over 20 million sentient species. You're meant to judge the different characters based on their personalities, their actions, whether they're the good guys or the bad guys, but never on their looks. And I suppose the criticism of Andor is that none of the main characters are aliens. I mean, yes, there was Radus, and on the Empire side there was the Oathkeeper, but when you're talking about the primary cast, Luthen, Clea, Bix, Cassian, Fel, Melshi, Mon Mothma, Saw Gerrera, they're all human. There are some droid and alien sidekicks here and there if you're talking about B2EMO, K2, Moroth, but it's very human-centric. I guess the big difference is that George Lucas would have no problem making Clea a Twi'lek. Another great example to highlight the difference between Tony Gilroy's approach and the rest of the saga comes from Return of the Jedi director Richard Marquand. On the subject of Admiral Akbar's appearance, he said this, I think it's good to tell kids that good people aren't necessarily good-looking people, and that bad people aren't necessarily ugly people. And I guess this demonstrates just how amazing Andor really was. The criticisms don't relate to the writing or the directing. In comparison to problems with other shows, they're quite minor. Now his comments about Narkina 5 are a little bit strange. He talks about the anatomies of different species and how that wouldn't work, but across Star Wars, including during this era, there are plenty of prisons housing inmates of all kinds of species. There is an argument Tony Gilroy makes which I do agree with. The Empire has always been mostly made up of humans because of their anti-alien sentiment. This is something I wrote out a few months ago. Palpatine didn't like aliens, to the point where he passed laws that prioritize humans and barred non-human sentience from certain areas of public life. This included bans in the military, non-human businesses shut, and mass exterminations and enslavement. So from this point of view, the lack of alien Imperials makes sense. Unless you're a genius like Thrawn, non-humans were widely barred from service. But on the Rebel front, you'd expect to see many more aliens on Yavin, and being part of the early Rebel movement. But I would say Andor is so human-centric that when you go to watch other Star Wars projects after it, it's a very jarring contrast. Go watch Star Wars Rebels or Ahsoka, then go back to watch Andor and you'll notice the difference. I'm not saying Andor doesn't feel Star Warsy, it definitely has the heart of the franchise, but it's definitely its own distinct flavour of Star Wars. And that is very gritty and grounded. It doesn't have the fantasy of some of the other shows. It's why I never really expected someone like Hera Syndulla or Ahsoka to show up. Even their physical presence would feel very out of place. And you might be thinking, well, there was an alien here and an alien there. when Cassian and Melshi escape Narkina 5, but no one that is so significant that you can call them a main character. I would argue the best place to have done this was during the Gorman massacre. We didn't know what a Gorman was. We heard about them in the expanded universe. Many of us assumed they were non-humans, but instead they were human. French people, to be more specific. Would it have been better if they made them alien? If you want to argue it would have made the tragedy less personable, George Lucas would disagree with you. Plenty of massacres across the galaxy were non-humans. In fact, most were. But what about his latest remarks, now that the show's come to an end? He said we got some heat for being under-creatured in season 1. I think we tried to work on that when we could. I maybe didn't ever crack the code on how to fully embrace creatures into everything else that we were doing. And this mirrors what some critics have been saying. Andor is a fantastic political spy thriller, and it fits in the Star Wars universe exactly as it is. But if Tony Gilroy had to make a different Star Wars project with a very different approach, maybe one that relied on aliens, could he capture the essence of, I don't know, the Force, lightsabers, the fantasy parts of it? I'd like to think he could, but it's impossible to say because he's not been given that opportunity. On social media, this was a very interesting take. My problem is that every Star Wars project introduces new species to an unhealthy extent, as if every planet has a form of intelligent species which is unrealistic. We need to start reusing species to reground ourselves. With Disney Star Wars, we have a ton of new aliens, but none of them really stick around for very long. In all fairness, Andor did recycle some of The Last Jedi's aliens, same with Skeleton Crew, but then there are those who appear once and never again. You could go back to the argument, there are 20 million sentient species, but I get what this person is saying. But credit to Tony Gilroy, I think he really tried for season 2. My favourite alien in all of Andor is probably Two Tubes, but I also really enjoyed the alien grandmother. And by the way, an interesting factoid that's just come out about her. In the original script, Claire abandoned her in a closet. My goodness, the way we treat our elderly on Coruscant. I think Cyril's mum had a point. But what do you guys think? Did Andor lack aliens? What's your take on it? Would you have wanted more main character aliens? Or do you think it's best if it's human-centric? Would you rather they use aliens more sparingly? Do you prefer them as Easter eggs and background characters, just like the Gungan skull in Luthen's shop? And if you're happier with it being human-centric, how do you feel about shows like Ahsoka, where in season 2 it's about to get very alien? The Celestial Ones, Grand Admiral Thrawn, the Great Mothers, the Night Troopers, Ahsoka herself, Hera Syndulla, the Catacombs, goodness knows what's in those. If you don't like aliens, I must be really freaking you out at the moment. I'm just being silly, but share your thoughts in the comments down below. I'd love to hear what you think. If you enjoyed this video, my dear friends, please be sure to give me a big fat thumbs up, subscribe if you're new, check me out on socials, and may the Force be with you, always.